All right. So today we want to stick with talking about value in fantasy football and uh how to view it correctly. And in this case, what I like to think about when I talk to people is the concept of like apples to apples, apples to oranges, and apples to tomatoes. That's the title of the video. So in this case, like all points are equal. Some points are different than others, and then some points just don't make any sense to compare against each other. So in this case, as I have underdog up for ADP in their system. Wide receiver points are different than running back points, and tight end points are different than quarterback points, except for at the end of the day, the bottom line of your overall stat sheet, all points are equal, right? So how we get to that point doesn't matter as long as we get to the point that we're winning all of our games and winning our fantasy championships. So the other thing, and I have ESPN pulled up because it's ESPN and it's easy. That when we look at the difference between tight ends, and we all know that Travis Kelsey is a unicorn. There's a 5 point difference between Travis Kelsey at tight end one, 5 points per game difference between Travis Kelsey as tight end one and George Kittle as tight end two. And then we have total points scored, which again, apples to oranges, total points scored versus points per game, or points by position versus other positions. So again, like we talked about, if you think Travis Kelsey is going to be a unicorn again this year, I don't because of his age. But if you do, he's the number one player because those 5 points versus replacement, you're just not going to be able to find. So when we look at quarterback and we do the same thing, we have total points scored. Last year was Patrick Mahomes, average points per game. We roughly see the difference between Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts being 5 points a game. Right now, the interesting thing about this is we take Davis Webb off is that when we try and find an apples to apple or apples to oranges comparison, when we look at like how we would have to go to say Justin Fields, what's taking Davis Webb off the board, that would make Justin Fields the next quarterback that we could compare him to from a value standpoint. So if I faded the entire position of quarterback, most leagues, Justin Fields was either going as a lottery ticket off the bench, or you're getting him off waivers. A lottery ticket from the draft versus getting him off the waivers later on in the season. So that was my top guy that I could go toe to toe with Jalen Hurts. And even though his total points is down and his points per game are also down, that's partially because there was a change in the offense midseason. But that was my closest guy to be able to go have a puncher's chance with. The other guy is Daniel Jones, who I believe finished as quarterback 9. And Daniel Jones is going to be a guy that was probably going undrafted in a lot of leagues, or he's a replacement player off the bench. That's the next guy. So the difference between Jalen Hurts being quarterback 1 or Josh Allen being quarterback 2 or Patrick Mahomes being quarterback 3, that gap between the next two available guys that if I just completely fade the position is rather significant. That's why quarterback is being pushed up the board this year. And the same thing with running back. We can look at an Austin Eckler doing 21 points a game, 22 points a game, if we round it up. And the next guy that we would have to look at if we just completely fade the position, your quintessential zero RB strat, like I'm going to have to maybe get a Breece Hall late in a draft. He only gave you a few games of production. A Tony Pollard late, a James Conner, or Ramondre Stevenson. Otherwise, I'm paying up for the position. So it's like, what are the chances I can find one of these guys later in the draft to go give me a puncher's chance against Austin Eckler? And I'm going to say Tony Pollard was probably the guy, even though if we look up what he did at the end of the season in the fantasy championship, he didn't even play. So like that's the risk when we start fading some of these positions. Wide receiver is a little different. This is why I don't particularly agree with the strategy this year. Wide receiver may have this massive gap between points per game and total points, ignoring Cooper Kupp getting hurt last year. That how am I going to go out and I'm going to have to find a guy that can replace or a guy that can fight battle on a week to week basis a Justin Jefferson if I'm not spending uh, prime capital to go get these guys. So when we look down the line of who would be that guy that I would have to spend that good money on to go battle a Justin Jefferson, and you're getting the guys. These are all guys that are draftable. Maybe Christian Kirk went undrafted in your league, but most of these other guys are being drafted in leagues, and that's part of the reason why the overall value of wide receiver has been driven up. And I'm one of those guys. I don't think wide receivers should be as valued because on a points to point basis, I can go out and I can score points at that position off of waivers, just like I can with quarterback. Tight end, once I hit that gap, I'm not going and finding anybody off of waivers unless I get lucky and they score a touchdown that week, and that's not predictable for the most part. So when we talk about apples to apples, I don't care what my pick is at any particular point in the draft, as long as that guy scores me points. I guess that's the biggest thing to look at. Like, I can go out even in any league, hyper competitive league, if I think Jalen Hurts is going to put up the most amount of points on the season, and we go all offensive players, and we look at like who scored the most points, it was Patrick Mahomes. But remember, Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts had higher points per game than Patrick Mahomes did. So on a points to points basis, like Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen are very respectable first overall picks, except for the fact that not all points are equal. Apple to oranges, Austin Eckler has will put up about the same amount of points as a Patrick Mahomes on a point to point or a game to game basis, but there are fewer running backs that will score points. So if I don't get an Austin Eckler, I have to get a Christian McCaffrey, because then that drop to the fantasy MVP last year was Josh Jacobs' overall value. That drop is so big that how am I going to manufacture that in different ways? So the same thing with like quarterback points, where it's like last year Jalen Hurts was going about quarterback 6, which means I could probably get him in like, we'll just say like the 7th round of most drafts, and that would give me the ability to go up and fight a Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen, who may have been going higher in their leagues. Now this year, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes may be like 2nd round draft picks in a lot of competitive leagues, and the same with Jalen Warren. Or excuse me, Jalen Hurts. So where else am I going to go out and get the points to be able to battle them? That's where the cutoff is. So how much more should I have to push up value of players or drop values of players? And this is what we're getting into, is most of those middle value guys at certain positions. When we look at going back to fantasy, when we look at that line, and we're going to draw the line here probably about quarterback 6 or 7, or excuse me, like 5 or 6, that when we draw that line, even at running back, when we draw that line probably around running back 5, when we draw that line, that point drop off is just not worth chasing the position. That's where you fade the position. So even in the case of like wide receiver, once I hit that line going back, there's a particular line probably about wide receiver 5, because AJ Brown in that offense is going to be limited. That there's no point on chasing the position. I already missed the bus. As another thing I always tell people, if I'm already late, there's no point on rushing, because I'm already late. I'm only going to make things worse. So like, just fade the position at that point. And tight end is the position that everybody likes to talk about, that if I don't get the unicorn Travis Kelce, who may go 101, then the next stop is Mark Andrews, and I have to overvalue Mark Andrews. He's got an ADP on Underdog at 29. It probably means I got to go up and get him at like 19 if I want to make sure that I get him. And then there's no point. So like, when would I take TJ Hawkinson? Well, that's hard. TJ Hawkinson is a little bit more difficult to evaluate in this case, but I know he's probably limited from an upside standpoint. I also know that he's probably limited from a floor standpoint, and he's just not a guy that you should be going out and getting, knowing that you have to go out and figure out a way to battle Travis Kelce team, because that Travis Kelce team, if that guy hits, is going to be in your fantasy playoffs. He's going to be a semifinalist. He's going to be in the finals, and you have to have that position to a position output to go against him. So at this point, I'm either fading the position, or I have to pinpoint who my guy are. Darren Waller, if you're not aware, he's going to be probably the number one receiving threat in the Giants. I know it's a little icky, but theoretically that gives you the ability to hop up and on a week to week basis, and have the puncher's chance to go up against Travis Kelce. So then as I go down the line, who's the next guy that I'm like, oh, who's going to give me a puncher's chance against Kelce? There's maybe a chance that Dolchich can do it. After that, like where's the guy that you're going to find that has that top overall output? And that's where guys like George Kittle become a little interesting, because we know on a week to week outcome George Kittle could do that. He could battle Travis Kelce. So if his ADP drops in your league, again, apples to apples, George Kittle can go up 1 week battle, maybe get lucky against Kelce. But now if you're drafting Kelce as the 6th overall pick, the guy who can go out and get Kittle as like a 7th round draft pick has a legitimate chance to battle Kelce for that 1 week that it needs to happen. So like, how should we appropriately be evaluating players is purely based off that cliff of how we're going to get points and how we're going to Frankenstein the other points together, because I can't always get guys. So maybe tomorrow I'll be talking about overall value and how to assess players with if they're appropriately valued in your draft. Because one of the things I was thinking about today was ADP is a rough approximation of where guys should be going, but you have to kind of have your own idea in mind with players, because of the fact that no one's rankings is going to be the same as your rankings where you value guys, and if you're appropriately, say, objectively valuing the range of outcomes on players. So a good indication on this would be like Bijan Robinson going at running back 3. Like if he hits as running back 3 overall, you did good getting him at around the 9th pick in the draft. If he goes at running back 4, what point drop off are you missing based off how high you had to go out and get him? So if you take Bijan Robinson at 9 and the guy who takes Tony Pollard at 19, and they roughly end up having the same scoring output, you lost because you picked Bijan Robinson. Now, again, when we look at all the players, if I take Bijan Robinson at about 9, who would I be taking that's different than Bijan Robinson at 9? That would give me more overall points or a positional advantage. And that's what we have to start looking at, is what am I passing on total to get to take a guy that may not have the same value versus a guy later on in the draft. So anyway, I think I've rambled enough for today. We'll probably pick up and talk more about value tomorrow.